The development context of this game is a vertigo-inducing roller coaster. The first thing that really stands out is the change of developers halfway through. The project was born in the hands of Donkey Crew, the same team behind Last Oasis, and out of nowhere, they were removed from the project for reasons that have never been properly explained. When you replace the team that has been building the game from the ground up, it is not just a matter of picking up where they left off. It is architecture, it is vision, it is pipeline. This usually causes delays, and in the case of Sand, it caused dozens of them. The release timeline of this game is a case study in how not to manage expectations. Originally scheduled for 2025, it was pushed to the first quarter of 2026, then delayed again from March to June, and now at the last minute, the team announced it will not launch as version 1.0, but as early access. This last-minute decision, just days before what would have been the final launch, tells me they were feeling the pressure to deliver something that simply was not cohesive enough to be sold as a finished product. It is not an elegant strategic choice, it is an emergency solution. The server slam that happened recently was the moment the House of Cards finally collapsed. The team admitted that when more than 4,000 players entered a single region, the system could not handle it. It was not an isolated bug, it was a cascading effect, one problem leading to another in sequence like falling dominoes. For a PvPvE extraction game, where the experience depends on stable servers and a healthy population, this is a fundamental issue. You do not fix this with a 2-week patch. And worse, this was discovered in a stress test, not internally. It means the infrastructure was not properly tested before they announced the date. There is also the human context that we cannot ignore. Part of the team is in Ukraine, and they have been open about the power outages and air raid alerts that delayed the work. This is real, it is heavy, and it is entirely understandable. But here is my personal opinion. Serious external problems like these should lead to more transparent communication and more conservative deadlines. From the start, not optimistic projections that have to be broken again and again. Poor risk management ends up eroding the community's trust, which grows more skeptical with each delay. What concerns me about the current development is the list of pending items. The team itself mentioned that enemy, AI, optimization, equipment balancing, the anti-cheat system, and the tutorial for new players are all behind schedule. This is not polishing. This is the core of the game. When you launch an extraction shooter in early access with bad AI, unstable servers, and no decent onboarding, you are asking for a negative first impression. And the first impression in the multiplayer market, especially extraction games, is almost everything. Tiny Build's communication during this process has also left much to be desired. During March, for instance, Steam still listed the game for that month, but on Discord, community managers were evasive, lacking concrete dates, admitting they needed the green light to share information. This creates a vacuum where speculation and frustration grow. The lack of active transparency makes me think the publisher itself was unsure of what would happen, which reflects a misalignment between what is being done behind the scenes and what is being sold to the public. In the end, playing the beta and looking at this entire history, I feel that Sand Raiders of Sophie has an absurdly strong premise. Giant mechs in a post-apocalyptic desert with PvPvE extraction? Man, that is gold on paper. But development seems to have been a series of reactions to crises rather than solid planning. The decision to go to early access with a roadmap open to the community is the most honest path right now, but it is also a sign that the foundation of the game needs much more time than any 3-month roadmap will solve. I hope they succeed, but experience has taught me that a good beta does not guarantee a good game at launch, and a bad schedule rarely fixes itself. In my view, the story of Sand is much more interesting in concept than in how it appears during the beta experience. The game's universe stems from an alternate timeline in which the Austro-Hungarian Empire expanded its colonization to other planets. And Sophie became a wealthy colony before being destroyed by a mysterious ecological disaster, which already creates a narrative foundation quite different from the norm for an extraction shooter. What I liked most about this background is that it does not try to sell just desert, loot, and shooting. There is a layer of colonial tragedy and broken promises that gives weight to the world because the characters come mainly from Galicia and return to Sophie trying to reclaim what they believe is theirs by right, after having served as labor to build that place. This gives the game a more human, bitter motivation, almost a mix of survival and historical revenge. The Tramplers also help the story have its own identity. They are not just vehicles or mobile bases. According to official material, they were machines used still in the colonization process and later became extensions of these scavengers' own lives, almost like war horses or mobile houses full of memory. This detail, for me, is one of the strongest hits of the lore because it makes the world feel lived in, not just set up to justify gameplay. At the same time, being very personal, the beta did not give me the feeling that this story is being told with the strength it deserves. I felt more the weight of the setting than the narrative itself. You notice ruins, feel that there was a collapse, see elements that suggest a rich and strange past, but the story still seems more promised than actually delivered. In other words, the lore is strong, but the narrative presence is still diffuse. There is one point that I think is particularly good: the mystery of the ecological disaster. The developer makes it clear that Sophie was abandoned in a hurry because of a catastrophe of unknown origin, and that works because it opens space for real curiosity. In an extraction game where repetition can wear thin quickly, having a world that suggests secrets, anomalies, and remains of a fallen civilization helps transform exploration into something more intriguing than just running after rare resources. Another interesting detail is that the story seems to want to mix imperial decadence with mysticism and social misery. The official site speaks of researchers, occultists, engineers, ex-soldiers, and other outcasts drawn to Sophie, which gives the impression of a world where everyone is after wealth, redemption, or answers, but for very different reasons. I quite like this idea because it escapes that clean, generic sci-fi. Here there is dust, resentment, and ambition. The story has personality to spare, but still lacks enough presence within the game to cause the impact the concept demands. The scenery, the origin of the characters, and the colonial heritage of Sophie caught my attention much more than most extraction shooter worlds. But for now, it all still feels like a grand prologue waiting for the narrative to actually begin. My feeling is that the gameplay has a very strong core idea, but still lives in that conflict between ambition and execution. The heart of the game lies in the Tramplers, those walking mechanical fortresses that act as transport, base, storage, and weapon. And this in itself already differentiates its loop from almost any current extraction shooter. What caught my attention most was precisely this almost naval side of the gameplay. Instead of just entering, looting, and leaving, you need to prepare the expedition, stock food, ammunition, turrets, and fuel, activate the reactor, and think of the Trampler as a real part of the match, not as a simple vehicle. This gives a very strong identity to the game, because the tension is not just in the character dying, but in the entire logistics going wrong. In practice, I found the exploration interesting, but still somewhat irregular in pace. The procedural map, the cities, ruins, forts, caves, and wreckage promise variety, and the game really tries to make you alternate moments of long travel with invasions of points of interest in search of loot and artifacts. However, playing the beta, I felt that sometimes the walk between one good situation and another was better in concept than in the actual flow of the match. The combat also gave me a mixed impression. The most promising part is when the fight involves Tramplers, because then the game gains scale, personality, and a chaos that fits well with the Dieselpunk Desert proposal, especially with mounted turrets, boarding the enemy vehicle, and looting the black box after victory. When the action remains only in on-foot shooting, at least from what I felt of the beta, it still seems to be searching for its own signature. A detail that I liked a lot is that the developer is trying to create different styles of play. The Voyage mode seems more aimed at testing builds and calmer looting, while the Storm Dive increases the risk with a storm closing the map and forcing confrontation for better rewards, including a high-value area around a large shipwreck. This is smart because it helps the gameplay not to depend on a single session pace. I also think the idea of allowing solo or squad and giving freedom to build small, stealthy, heavy, or totally chaotic Tramplers is very well-founded. This modular editor seems to be the most valuable piece of the entire gameplay because it transforms preparation into real strategy and not just a loadout menu. In theory, this opens space for very different styles of approach, from those who want to avoid conflict to those who want to hunt other players on the map. Sand, Raiders of Sophie, already has excellent potential because it mixes extraction shooter with mobile fortress combat in a way that really feels new. But the beta still left me with the impression of a game that is more memorable for its systems and the fantasy of piloting a trampler than for the immediate feel of the gunplay and the pace on the field. So today it seems much more promising than refined. The graphics work much better through art direction than through the pursuit of raw realism. From the first contact, what draws the most attention is this mix of post-apocalyptic desert with the diesel punk aesthetic of an alternate 1910, something that really gives visual identity to the game. The look of the tramplers, for me, is the game's greatest graphic highlight. The idea of transforming these walking machines into customizable fortresses full of modules, weapons, and their own personality gives the game a strong and immediately recognizable silhouette, which greatly helps to sell its visual fantasy. In the beta, the feeling I had is that the world of Sophie has presence, but not necessarily top-tier finish at all times. The scenery of islands that have already been submerged, ruins of cities, wreckage, and remnants of the Austro-Hungarian Empire's luxury creates a very stylish background. But at many moments, the impact comes more from the artistic composition than from impressive technical detail. I really liked how the game uses the emptiness of the desert in favor of the image. When you see these huge mechanical constructions moving on an open horizon with abandoned cities and procedural areas scattered around the map, the visual gains a very good scale and conveys a sense of a hostile and decadent world that fits the proposal perfectly. Another point I think is strong is that the art seems to understand its own proposal of a fallen and scavenged world well. Official descriptions speak of expansive cities, loot scattered through ruins and shipwrecks, plus a complete day and night system. And all this suggests a game that tries to build visual atmosphere not only with beautiful textures, but with contrast between exploration, abandonment, and danger. At the same time, the very fact that the early access page mentions visual improvements and optimization as part of what is still under development already shows that the team recognizes that the current graphic package is not yet definitive. For me, this matches quite well with the beta impression. The visual style already exists and is strong, but the technical refinement still seems to be running after the artistic ambition. Sand did not impress me with next-gen graphic fidelity, but won me over with its visual personality. It is that type of game where I remember more the image of the tramplers crossing the dunes and the ruins of a dead imperial world than ultra-detailed textures. And honestly, that is worth a lot when the art direction knows exactly what identity it wants to convey. My most honest opinion about performance is that it is the game's biggest problem, and not just a secondary detail. Playing the beta and following what the developer has disclosed, I see that performance looks more like that of a multiplayer prototype than a product ready to be launched, especially on the server and stability side. The server slam, which was tested recently with more than 4,000 concurrent players in a single region, made the situation very clear. When the pressure increased, the server infrastructure could not handle it. The team admitted that the system began to fail in a cascade, with back-end problems that multiplied into each other. This is not just a bit of lag, it is critical instability that directly affects the experience, especially in an extraction game that depends on a smooth connection so as not to lose loot and have fair combat sensations. In the beta, I felt that there was already a base of problems that, in practice, only worsened when many players entered together. People reported rubber banding, spawning in midair, characters that could not move, collision bugs, and even deaths from falling from the sky without even having contact with the game at the beginning. This gave me the feeling that the game is still a long way from being technically stable, even in controlled tests. Hit detection is also a point that I find very worrying when I think about combat performance. User reports showed that shots and even rockets go straight through enemy tramplers, hit markers appear without the damage actually happening, and in many cases the recorded damage does not correspond to what the player sees. This is not just a design problem, it is a technical problem of how the game is registering collisions and communicating with the server. The very decision to delay the launch from June 10 to June 22 and transform what would be 1.0 into early access was basically a response to performance. The team said it needs more time to rebuild and refine the network infrastructure so that the game can support the density of players they want to have. For me, this is a very clear sign that the game was not ready to be launched as a final product, and that performance was the biggest bottleneck. It is also worth mentioning that, according to Steam, the game still aims to bring optimization and quality of life improvements, which already indicates that the team recognizes that the technical package still needs a lot of work. This appears both in official communications and on the early access page itself, which makes it clear that performance and optimization are part of the future development roadmap. In the end, the performance of Sand Raiders of Sophie is the biggest obstacle the game has to becoming a truly good experience. The central idea is strong, the visual style has identity, and the trampler gameplay is interesting, but without a stable server infrastructure, without fixing serious bugs, and without consolidated optimization, all of this loses much of its appeal. I am hoping that the team can do serious work, but the beta left me with the feeling that the game is still much closer to a technical test than a consolidated product. The game is entering early access on June 22, and not as 1.0, which is already a huge sign that the experience is still under construction. When a team needs to delay the launch at the last minute and change from full version to early access, it means they are admitting the product is not ready to be sold as finished. And after seeing servers crash with 4,000 players, hit detection failing, and constant rubber banding, I prefer to wait. If you are curious and want to know about the price, it is actually reasonable. The game should be released for around $20 with a launch discount that should bring it down to about $16. For what the proposal offers, open world, customizable mechs, PvPvE extraction, and procedurality, this value is not absurd. This game is ideal for those who love the idea of Sea of Thieves, but want something with a heavier touch of survival and mechs. If you enjoy extraction games like Escape from Tarkov or Hunt Showdown, but want a slower, more strategic version focused on vehicle logistics, this might speak to you. It is also for those who like deep customization, because the assembly of the Trampler is really the heart of the game. If you are the type who likes to spend time building your mobile base, planning routes, and looting in a group, it has potential. On the other hand, if you are a console player who will get it on PS5 or Xbox Series, I would still wait. The console version does not yet have a confirmed date, and the focus right now is PC. Furthermore, if you do not have patience for server problems, desync, FPS drops, or lack of content, this early access version will annoy you. And if you play solo and hate forced PvP, it becomes even harder to recommend because the game depends on multiplayer tension to work. Sand Raiders of Sophie has a concept that makes my eyes wide open, but the technical execution is still far behind the ambition. If you are a PC gamer, have friends to play in a squad, love mechs, and do not mind dealing with technical problems to help shape a game, it might be worth getting in now for the low price. But if you want a polished, stable, and complete experience, my suggestion is the same one I am making. Put it on your wish list, follow the updates, and buy it only when the game shows it is truly ready to welcome you.